I'd just like to read a headline from today. The CDC lied about COVID vaccine deaths, files show. So while I appreciate the hero complex of Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Slavitt, the fact is that we know that a lot of the information that was being peddled by this White House was untrue. We know that the CDC lied. We know that Anthony Fauci lied. We know that Mr. Biden lied. And you were pushing propaganda.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
No, I will not.
I'd love to know the source of your
citation. This is my time.
Yeah.
Mr. Flaherty, when you served in the executive office of the president, you were the assistant to the president and director of digital strategy. Is that correct?
Congressman, that's true. At the end of my service, I was promoted.
And I think it's fair to say that the position of President Biden was to get as many Americans to take the COVID vaccine as possible. Is that also true?
Congresswoman, I would agree with that characterization.
And yes or no, was your routine dialogue with social media companies part of a strategy to achieve this goal of the president?
Congressman, we engage with these social media companies.
Please answer the question, yes or no.
They had stated
was that the purpose of engaging with the social media companies? Yes or no?
Congresswoman, the engagement with social media companies was certainly in service of
Thank you.
The work we were doing.
The goal of getting people vaccinated, correct?
In the context of the president's efforts
Yes.
to vaccinate.
Was the strategy to engage with social media companies something that you or Mr. Slavitt came up with yourself, or was this directed by other White House personnel?
Congressman, could you define what you mean by the strategy?
What we just described, engaging, you've been testifying for several hours now, the strategy of engaging with social media companies in part to encourage the American people to take the vaccine. Was that a strategy that you and Mr. Slavitt came up with, or were you working with other people within the White House?
Congresswoman, certainly the effort to make sure as many people in America were vaccinated should not be
My
surprising.
question is, who came up with the strategy to work with social media companies to further that agenda?
Congresswoman.
Just you and Mr. Slavitt? Were you in an office one day and you decided, you know what we can do? We're going to come up with an idea that will work with social media companies to try to further this vaccination agenda.
Congresswoman, our office worked with social media companies to...
I'm not asking about working with the social media companies. Who else was involved in the White House making that decision?
Congressman, there were certainly a number of discussions about various elements of our plan.
Was President Biden or White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain or other senior White House officials aware of the fact that you were asking social media companies to demote or remove vaccine-related content?
Congresswoman, you know, again, we were across the
Were they aware of your activities as demonstrated by the emails? Were they aware of your activities? It's a simple question.
Congresswoman, I'm not authorized to discuss internal discussions within the White House.
Did you ever inform the social media companies that you were briefing President Biden, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, or any other senior White House officials?
Congresswoman, I don't recall specifics of who I was briefing when. It's been a couple of years.
So let's put up I have an email here. I'd like to direct your attention to this email, which specifically states that you were referring to, quote, it might help to consolidate this and the other recent conversation or convo your higher-ups had with Ron. Do you see that in that email?
Yes, Congresswoman, I do.
Who is Ron?
At the time, Ron Klain was the Chief of Staff at the White House.
All right. And so there were conversations that you had with Ron Klain about these activities that you were engaging in with the social media companies.
Congresswoman, I don't recall having a specific conversation with Ron about this.
You realize you're under oath, don't you, Mr. Flaherty?
Congresswoman,
Do you realize you're under oath? Do you realize that you've sworn to tell the truth?
Congresswoman, I agree.
My colleagues on the other side of the aisle state that there is no government censorship because these are private companies who could make their own decisions. If this is the case, then why did you think that reaching out to the companies about their content moderation policies was a productive use of your time?
Congresswoman, sorry, could you restate the question?
Yes. Why did you think that reaching out to these social media companies was a productive use of your time if you never had any influence with them?
Well, Congresswoman, certainly these social media companies had a set of policies that they stated.
Why did you care whether they enforced their policies? What difference did that make to you? Are you a part of the contract? Is it your responsibility to enforce policies of private companies?
Congresswoman, I think it's important to remember the fact that this is, these kinds of engagements with people who publish information are standard across government.
You can try to gaslight us as much as you want to and try to act like your activities didn't have any influence. But one of the things I noticed, Mr. Flaherty, is that you use the F word an awful lot in your email correspondence with the social media companies for emphasis. We all know why you were doing it and why you use the F word in your emails to these companies. It was to emphasize the importance of them doing exactly what you were telling them to do. You violated the First Amendment rights of American citizens. You know that, and we know it too.